Chapter 14, The Taste of Humble Pie. The following week, it seemed like there was electricity flowing through the halls as the water cooler talk buzzed with the news that Mr. Mabie's and Miss Reyes' departures. Senior executives were booked for one-on-ones with Bart all throughout the first part of the week. Tommy and Bart worked at a steady pace with other leaders within the organization on how they could apply their four-step process company-wide. In preparation for the company meeting, they would hold the following week with video conferencing for the remote employees to watch. When the big morning for the company meeting arrived, everyone on site waited in a large conference room while off-site employees streamed the meeting live to their desktops. Bart and Tommy were stationed in another room in the meeting room, from where they would broadcast live to everyone. At exactly 9:30 a.m., Bart stepped up to the microphone. Everyone in the room was silent as he began, as if screen prompts had flashed telling everybody to hold their breath and not make a sound. First off, I want to thank you for coming this morning. From what I understand, some of you have turned in your departure notices and are only with us for a short time longer. Some have already left. I would like to start out by saying I'm sorry. I hope you will forgive those that followed my instructions to make the organizational changes like we did as well. I take responsibility for what has happened around here for the last few months. The view on the monitors everyone was watching was of a caring and empathetic person speaking from the heart. On the sidelines around Bart, the senior leaders were positioned and relaxed and appeared to be operating as a single unit as they nodded in agreement while Bart spoke. The employees began to breathe again and relax in their seats. Bart continued the meeting by thanking key members, and discussing what his intentions were and were not. He said he wanted to be clear that this was a learning opportunity for everyone involved. As the meeting was nearing Bart's self-imposed transition point, he said he wanted everyone to know he had a plan and would be sharing it with the company as they would move forward. My intentions are to get this once thriving company back in order by entrusting my leaders and staff. I will be here to guide the teams and make sure the process is in the same and conforms across the company, he said. I take full responsibility for the lack of consistent direction and want to assure everyone that I will do my best to make sure everyone has a clear and consistent actions. I understand that there have been a few hours of unpaid overtime put in for this release by our salaried staff, which I'm thankful for, and I am planning a company event with awards and prizes to help those who help us finish this project once we have the new dates. Next, Bart mentioned changes in some of the company's leadership positions and that the consultant they had hired, Mr. Mabie, was no longer with the organization. As if on cue, laughs and applauses erupted throughout the halls and cubicle forests. Lastly, before he handed the mic over to other leaders, he reminded everyone he was thankful for them and said, I will do my best to make Sanitas S a wonderful place to work. The meeting rooms came alive with claps and whistles. Bart looked over at Tommy, who gestured like Bart's zipper was down. Bart glanced down in shock, then realized it was Tommy's prank. Tommy and the other managers followed with some unified message. They announced there would be meetings with each of the different teams over the next week and few days, and that anyone who had turned in their notice earlier in the week could recall it with HR with no hard feelings. As the meeting drew close, Bart again took the podium to make a final announcement. I hope the meeting today and the one-on-ones in the coming days will convince you to stay. I'd like to say I'm putting the yearly release project on hold. During this hold, we will review the affected areas of business and determine what needs attention quickly. After one more round of thank yous to everyone, the meeting came to a close. The room and the remote locations broke into a steady wave of clapping one last time as Bart and his team exited the main stage. Throughout the next 2 days, Tommy hosted planning and strategy meetings with his departments and other divisions within the company, including the offshore groups and HR. By Friday, he was wrapping up his to-do list in his office, and for the first time in some while, a tide of emails from frustrated business partners that were clogging up his inbox had subsided. So he was preparing to put the week behind him. As he was straightening up, he noticed a card sitting on the front corner of his desk. He hesitated to open it. His wrapping up of the week had been going well, and he wasn't sure he wanted to open a new can of worms right before heading home. Tommy sat back in his chair, and he took a deep breath in anticipation of bad news. Picking up the envelope, he noticed the trademark yellow smiley on the front. As he began to open it, the feeling of pride and thankfulness welled up inside him. The card was from his delivery team and expressed thanks, saying they would pass on the happy hour and the dinner because they believed he had delivered on what he had pledged. There were many signatures and a special note from Michael saying he was disappointed that Tommy didn't get a raise for all of his trouble. And he felt that disappointment constituted a happy hour. Tommy closed his laptop and packed up his papers and the card into the bag and headed home. His climb into his truck, he wondered what Maisie was doing this weekend. It dawned on him that he was enjoying having her around on the weekends and that she had been partly responsible for giving him the time to focus on work recently by keeping Brian busy and checking his homework. When Tommy pulled off the road and onto the gravel drive, he noticed Hank was at the gate waiting for Brian. He decided to get out and wait for the bus with him. Soon it arrived, and with an explosion, Brian leaped from his yellow chariot with carrots in one hand, like swords of a gladiator that were 8 inches long and orange. In his other hand, he grasped a small bag of green cubes from the feed store. The boy declared, "There's my buddy." But Tommy didn't know if he was addressing him or Hank. That night, Maisie came to visit her parents and to check on her boys. Tommy offered to practice his cooking skills on her if she would join him. She agreed, so long as Brian could go with her to the feed store again. Later that evening over dinner, Tommy asked Maisie if she had thoughts of coming back to live in the area. He mentioned that Vanessa was happy having her around and maybe he could hire her to watch Brian. She smiled, and Brian fired off a kick in Dad's direction under the table, adding, "I don't need a babysitter." As dinner went on, Brian recounted the many cool things he'd found at the feed store while he was out with Maisie. Later, after Brian was tucked in for the night, the adults on the porch had discussed how the work had been progressing. They also talked about how Brian was becoming focused and happy again. "The last 4 months have been difficult, but I'm happy with the direction we are headed in," said Tommy. "It would be nice to have you around more than just on weekends, but I understand you're kind of far from here, and it'd be a long daily commute." "It'll only be a few more years before I can get my own veterinarian clinic, unless you decide to use those business skills and open up a clinic nearby," she joked. It was getting late. Maisie said goodnight and Tommy offered to walk her home. She smiled and said, "I'll be fine. I know the way down the path." "At the very least, let me give you a flashlight," he offered. "All right then," she said. Tommy retrieved the flashlight from Maisie, then watched her walk down the lane. He followed the light through the woods, losing it from time to time in the dense foliage. Soon the phone rang, and Maisie let him know that she was home. They said their goodnights and hung up. When the phone rang the next morning, Tommy froze for the moment, hoping that it wasn't the office. Eventually, he answered, relieved to hear Vanessa's voice, inviting him and Brian over for breakfast. Tommy had learned not to try to get out of things when Vanessa wanted their company, so he roused Brian up and to head over. As Don opened the door for them, the smell of fresh biscuits and bacon filled the air. Over breakfast, Tommy dropped the news that Maisie would come home if he opened her a vet clinic. Boom! Now she kicked him under the table. This kicking is becoming a regular thing, he thought. Really? Vanessa looked surprised. We have been trying for years to get her back, and all it would take is a little clinic? No, Mom. Tommy and I were just discussing that you and Dad were getting older. No, we weren't, Tommy denied. Now he was doing the kicking, and Brian was laughing. Well, we mentioned you liked having me around. I told Tommy if I got my own clinic, I might consider coming back someday. Everyone laughed and talked about their week, enjoying the time they had together and the delicious country breakfast Vanessa had made for them. After breakfast, Vanessa and Tommy sat on the porch, and she asked him how work was going. He replied that work was a mess, but they are now moving in the right direction. How about Brian, she asked. He's back to his usual in school and doing well and keeping up with his chores and his projects around the house, Tommy said. Seems that before long, things will be back to normal with him once again. Vanessa gave him a conspiratorial grin and said, So how are things with you and Maisie? He wasn't ready for this direct question, but smiled and said, Maybe she is developing her intentions on opening her own clinic. Her intentions, Vanessa said. Yep, just like Don needed help to find his intentions, right? Tommy said, beaming.